Hi, my name's Katie. I'm a product designer for AI Framework, and I titled my talk in the agenda Feature Discovery. But I think maybe a better way of describing it is prompts to trigger desired behavior, but that's not very catchy. So I'm just going to put some pictures here so that you know what I'm talking about today. So anything from onboarding new users with some temporary UI, we have banners shown to like net new users of GitLab. Also for existing users, drawing attention to a newly added call to action, also having like additional disclosure. It can also be, I don't know the right word for this, but upselling, like advertising functionality that's in a higher tier of GitLab. And we also have lots of different UI treatments. We have like hotspots, badges, banners, popovers. The language that we use is kind of inconsistent. The mechanisms, like this is a popover that loads upon page load versus this is something that shows on hover. Some things are temporary, some things are persistent. So this is like a very kind of broad topic that I'm talking about today because it's kind of feature discoverability, it's kind of onboarding, it's kind of adoption. And there are different audiences, different intents, and different UI treatments. So there's lots of differences. It's a pretty broad category, but there are some similarities as well. So hopefully that gives you a bit of context. So my starting point, how did I get involved with this? Right around the time when a lot of our AI features were maturing to GA, I was just doing kind of like a low-hanging fruits consistency audit for our AI features. Like, for example, how do we signal AI features in the product? What language do we use? What iconography? And I also noticed that the amount of users who had access to our AI features versus the amount of like repeat usage was just a bit lower than my expectation. No scientific calculation, but I was also, when I was in kind of low-hanging fruit mode, I was like, I wonder if there is some kind of low-hanging fruit to drive adoption to these features. So obviously low adoption is going to be feature specific. But just from like heuristics, a lot of our AI features were just calls to action added to an existing UI. And I think a lot of them, there was a similarity of like, maybe it wouldn't be super clear what's going to happen when I press the button. This is also when we were like newly introducing AI features. So maybe the user didn't necessarily know what this icon meant. And then unique to the AI features, some of them are open-ended, like Duo Chat. And so Duo Chat, we know, is like a persistent button. And in just kind of anecdotal evidence, when I was chatting to customers, users would use Duo Chat for something that it wasn't capable of, because it's like you can type anything, have like it wasn't able to fulfill the request, and they'd have kind of a negative experience. So in addition to like adoption, it's also how do we drive users into the happy path? So I was looking for like just kind of quick wins. I work horizontally across many features. So I'm trying to think about what is something like some guidelines or maybe a sticker sheet that I can produce that many teams could adopt just to lower the barrier to like think about adoption and onboarding. Um, so I started thinking, yeah, not real designs, but I started thinking about, is there just some common pattern that we can use? And like, if it's a popover or whatever, I can test some UI copy, see what's effective, and recommend that all AI features adopt something like this. For some of the ones where we want to drive users into the happy path, I was also considering, like for Duo Chat, rather than the entry point being so open-ended, having like a more targeted like value proposition as a temporary UI element that eventually was like minimized after users learn kind of like what the chat is and is not capable of. So these are just me sketching. But then when it comes time to like actually think about pushing this work forward, I kind of hit this stumbling block, which I've hit even in other times at GitLab, which is I want to like signal these features exist and drive adoption. What's the best way to do it? Should I signal it with special UI? What UI do I use? What copy is effective? Like, what is effective? How do we measure that? If we're adding a temporary UI, what are the criteria to remove the temporary UI? And then also GitLab has a little bit of a bad habit of being just a bit shouty. And so I don't want to add to the shoutiness because that can kind of like cause blindness to important notices. I was trying to think about what's a short-term goal that I can think about. And feature discoverability mechanisms impact all features, not just AI features. So we have this pajamas page about feature discoverability, and it was like quite agnostic. It wasn't very opinionated. It kind of said these are some elements you can use, and it had a bit of opinions. I would like to make this page a little bit more opinionated. And a little bit, I would like to collect evidence to figure out which mechanisms are effective and when is it appropriate to use them. So a little bit more evidence-based. I caveat this with, this is a broad topic and there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. Like I'm trying to make abstracted guidelines or like a decision tree that's slightly more opinionated, which hopefully like increases the effectiveness and decreases the inconsistencies in the product. So I wanted to explore the space, and lots of smart people have thought about this in a lot of different angles. There's a ton of historical design work, not a huge amount of research, or maybe not research targeted on the questions that I wanted answered, but it was still really cool to see all of the explorations that have been done in the past. There's also a ton of examples from products that I can look at for inspiration, and a ton of like reputable kind of desk research, like Nielsen Norman Group, for example. So just collating kind of best practices together. Also surveying GitLab staff, surveying about a couple of different things. First of all, the current like understanding of our existing guidelines, like what's working well, what's not working well, but also broader, like when you do introduce a new feature or significant change into the product, how do you measure adoption? What's challenging about that? What's worked well? So trying to collect like from all the knowledge of GitLab. So I started with just like as an exploration testing in a small scale usability test, the like making small changes to UI to understand, to get like a little bit of a signal of like what impact different things have. I think this was an interesting exercise, but this isn't quite the right style of validation for this. It's more like a starting point to point me in the right direction. But it did kind of help me learn some things, which I'll talk about if I have time. Um, but yeah, I think my biggest learning from this is like actually the biggest lever that we can pull is like, is the button title clear? We don't necessarily need to chuck a banner if the button title is clear. But I'll talk more about it if I have time. So action so far, I wanted to do more validation. Like my original goal was like to make this pajamas guidelines more evidence-backed. But after some feedback from people around GitLab, I think there are some small incremental changes that I could make that will hopefully improve things. So I've already rewritten like the body of the feature discoverability page to be a lot more opinionated with a focus on exercising restraint and really trying to validate if there's, this was already information on the page, but I think it's more highlighted now, like try to validate if you can introduce a feature or signal a capability without like shouting about it in the UI. There's a lot more that I want to do. I've chopped this up into lots of little pieces. A lot of these are just kind of like tidy ups. Like this page is getting overly long and it probably needs to be separated into separate topics. But I think there's some really interesting things that I want to tackle, which is like also measures of success, measures of adoption, and also like I have written in the guidelines now about, try to just see if you can be successful in introducing your feature without special UI, but a bit more guidance about like how you would do that. And what's really exciting for me is I'm going to be working with the growth team to run actual A/B test with product analytics. I kind of hypothesize that the most significant impact on adoption or discoverability will be the placement and label of the call to action. Well, actually, the biggest one is the feature should exist. It actually solves a user problem, but that's kind of table stakes. But assuming that it does, making sure that you introduce the feature in the right place in the workflow and that the label is clear. And then I want to test things like this duo chat example where it's like a popover on page load. I want to test the actual uplift or impact of that kind of pattern. I hypothesize it will probably result in slightly more like button clicks, for example, but we have to weigh that against the engineering efforts and also GitLab being kind of like a very crowded UI with lots of noise. So I want to, basically get like actual numerical evidence of impact of different mechanisms, which is like what I kind of did in my tiny test, but on a large scale. And do I still have time? Yes. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit more about the plans that I have in detail. Yeah, so just from my small scale usability test, again, I'm looking for low-hanging fruit to drive adoption. I'm just something that could be universally applicable. So I ran these small usability tests with this feature here, which is when I'm authoring an MR, I can get AI to write the body of the MR based on code changes. So my first hypothesis was it's maybe not super clear like what this is actually going to do. So testing the difference between just changing the name was an interesting like uplift. And then in the test that I was running, I was like testing the difference between this and this with the hotspot, for example. I kind of noticed users' cursors being on like this side of the screen, and they were often missing this button because of its position on the screen. So actually, I'm not actually suggesting we do this, but this actually was like the most successful thing that I tested. So I don't take this as like hard evidence, but I think it's like an interesting indicator of like, there are very small, like low engineering effort changes we could make that would probably have a significant impact as compared to like these very big, shouty feature discovery moments. But I will continue to kind of validate these hunches with actual product analytics data. Another thing, and this isn't necessarily going to be pajamas guidance. I'm still figuring it out, but I noticed we don't like in different product teams that I've been in, we don't like have an amazing habit of measuring adoption and like tracking the impact of iterations over time in analytics. So it would be cool to remove some of those barriers, and I would love to see UX also be a bit more advocates for like data-based decision making and like pushing for more of these analytics. Yeah, just because it's a non-subjective benchmark and allows us to track things over time. So there's like table stakes things, which is like you actually need to know what your feature does and what it's trying to achieve. And that your solution addresses the user problem. This is like before measurement, just normal design process stuff. But like awareness, like a good understanding of what it is you're actually trying to achieve. And then in terms of like measuring adoption, just like making it a little bit more easy to think about, like, have a bit more guidelines about how would you even go about doing that. We as product designers can push more for this kind of measurement, but I feel like a lot of like it's just a hunch that a lot of product designers maybe don't feel empowered or educated about how to like what is the process at GitLab, how do I push for this, how do I define metrics, how do I work with my PM. So I think it would be good to just document this as more of a consumable so that we can also like factor metrics into these kind of decisions. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Happy to have any feedback. I don't think there's anything in the agenda, but if anyone has any feedback.
I don't have a question or anything, but I just wanted to say that I love your work and it's a great example of really high quality. And I love that
Thanks.
you're pushing for high quality in the UI.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really like it too. I guess to answer, you had the question of common challenges. I didn't type it in yet, but one thing I always struggle with is just the when to use pull versus push sort of methods for making them aware of new features. Um, I think it's like, again, I work in the idea fair bit, so people have very strong workflows, and I want to respect that. But it's sometimes hard to make things identifiable through letting them discover it through their natural workflow versus I just like when I push stuff on them, I find developers especially don't like to read. They like to play around and break things and see how it works. So that's probably the biggest challenge that I face. One thing I've been trying to think about is if when a user uses a particular feature, if I then notify them, would you like to try using this remote scanning or whatever new feature we add? Um, it's something that I'm thinking about is just like maybe that's a way I can combine like a kind of a soft push of like, hey, try this. Here's nudge them to try it at that particular moment that they need it, rather than just like here's a walkthrough up front or here's a notification up front when they update the extension. So yeah, it's just kind of things I've been thinking about.
Yeah, totally. That's what one of the things in my desk research is like walkthroughs are not effective. People can't keep multi-step workflows in their head and then go try to remember it. So nudges make sense.
Yeah, when you said your hypothesis is what people don't read pop-ups, I definitely agree with that. Feels like an ad or something.
I actually forgot to mention, but in the agenda, I've linked 2 surveys, which anyone on this call is welcome to take. One of them is just about just your experience, like launching significant changes or new features, where I ask a lot more in-depth questions. And then the second one is just a survey about the current state of the feature discovery guidelines in Pajamas. I'm going to leave that survey running as I'm making the changes, so please feel free to take it multiple times. I want to use that as a way of like creating a feedback loop as I'm making these changes. So please take my survey. Cool. Thank you so much for the chat.
Thank you, Katie. Thanks for sharing. Really appreciate it.